now with the advent of the internet and social media and globalization, we have what we say a homogenizing of culture, which means that instead of having all these very unique cultures separated by not only geography and history, we have cultures now that are sort of coming together. And so even in the time that I was in China for 15 years compared to America, um, yes, the language is different and many things we think about are different, but at the same time, I could see China becoming much more westernized, even though they try to sort of say, hey, let's not be too westernized in some ways. It just happens sort of as an extension of culture related to things like capitalism, globalization, industrialization, mass communication. And so to look at movies as a cultural artifact, we look at the word artifact in this case and think of something that we would see in a museum related to the history or sort of the heritage of some people. So if we have a cultural artifact, and basically what we're talking about is taking a snapshot, like a little picture of a period of time um, related to the culture and the history. And so movies, with the invention of movies from the early part of the 20th century, around just post-industrial era, um, we see sort of these things come up between the early movies that Edison had made and the ones that we're going to look at here from D.W. Griffith and some other people. And even though they are a sign of the times, especially like this Birth of America, which essentially gave the KKK sort of their blueprint for putting on white hoods and white robes and riding through the night and terrorizing people of color and so forth, it's still an important artifact because it represents that, less than 100 years ago, these were the things that sort of were the popular idea or the popular zeitgeist, the things that people wanted or desired in their aspect of what it is that they were involved with in their day-to-day life. And so we're going to talk about this as looking at movies as cultural artifacts, again, as sort of those little pieces in the culture that we can attribute to. So in this case, they offer a window into the American culture and social history, and that has value, especially now as America continues to sort of decline and have difficulties with the situations because of the pandemic, foreign policy, internal terrorism, gender equivalencies or fluencies. And so it's still important to sort of look back and say, okay, how did we get to this point? And what are we going to do in the future, if that's possible? I think that's always valuable in that case. And so it's a mixture of art and business and popular entertainment, and movies provide a host of insights into America's shifting ideals, fantasies, and preoccupations. I think I like this kind of idea that they've got here about movies as sort of being, in some ways, the canary in the coal mine. I mean, it essentially, it's so expensive now to produce a movie. Budgets are major. You're talking about, millions of dollars in order to produce a movie that will have an impact worldwide and have a large audience. And because of that, I think that if we have shifting ideals, fantasies, and preoccupations, the things that we're interested in, that we want to show the world in our movies, then it does take a lot of money to sort of make those effects appealing for a wider audience. And so obviously, look at the trend in movies now, which is basically they're all theme parks because they're all about superheroes and things like that. It's always about the extension of what can be sold through this idea. And so even if we look at a series like the Avengers, we would say that there are shifting ideals in there. We see some things that um, the producers or the writers sort of include that are reflective of what's happening in our society. And I'd say in America, we're still dealing with a lot of race stuff. And if that's the case, then we're going to have racial issues also represented in our entertainment. And so it's kind of an interesting bookend considering that this article is going to start with D.W. Griffith, which I said, sort of set the pace for, the very sort of racist sort of ideals of people like the KKK and white supremacists and, people that that don't believe that all Black lives matter or that all Asian lives matter. Stop Asian hate, these kind of things. And so that's really on one side. And then we fast forward to now, where we see a concerned effort, I think, in our culture, in our art, and so forth, to generate a dialogue or an effort to sort of say, okay, yes, we know we have race problems. Where do we go from here? What can we do about it? Can we get along? How do we fix it? Are there any solutions? What are the problems? And so now we see that again, 100 years later, practically 100 years later. Okay, so I've done the introduction. So let's go into the many films of the silent era here, please.